Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today's video, very excited to talk about the best fantasy football playoff schedules for wide receivers this season. Now, we didn't get to our waiver wire video for Mondays, had some technical issues, but there's some players here that you could still add off the wire, I think, that do have some of the best playoff schedules at the end of the season here. So, of course, we're looking at weeks 15, 16, and 17 for you guys to ensure that we're looking at these correct schedules. That's typically where everyone's playoffs are. And again, I got 5 teams here, and we'll go through all the players that are fantasy relevant on those teams. If you guys enjoy the video, be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed, and comment down below with any trades you're looking to make, hopefully to acquire these players. Let's get to it, starting with the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens have an excellent fantasy schedule to finish the season, and it would have been awesome if Rashad Bateman was healthy. I was looking to trade for him and looking to acquire him because the finish to his fantasy season, as you guys can see, is fantastic. He goes Browns in Week 15, who are 19th in fantasy points allowed. The Atlanta Falcons and the Pittsburgh Steelers are the way the Ravens finish, and those are second last and dead last in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Exactly what you want to see, but the problem is we don't seem to have fantasy relevant players to potentially add. Devin Duvernay is the leader in terms of routes run on the team. Demarcus Robinson lately and on the season is right behind him. Not much right behind him, I would say, with Robinson, but lately has been right behind him. He was even with him in routes run last week. I think ran one less route than him the week before. So are either of these guys players I want to play? Probably unlikely. Mark Andrews is going to make that return, so maybe you look more to Mark Andrews as the potential add here, because I think regardless, these are teams that aren't great against the pass in general. I know the Falcons are dead last in passing yards allowed, so could look to Mark Andrews instead in this spot. But in any case, like Devin Duvernay, I'm surprised to see he's like a 70+% rostered player. If you wanted to acquire him, you could definitely do it very cheaply, and there's a potential after a really down week that on the waiver wire this week he ends up being dropped, and you could add him. But he's a player that this is definitely reserved for those of you in like 14-team leagues. That's a player that you could maybe target on the cheap. But the problem to me is the Ravens are 28th in pass attempts per game. Lamar, though, is 5th in average depth of target, 9.4 yards. So potentially some big plays for Duvernay that we haven't seen lately could make their return. But again, this is a Ravens team that just doesn't want to throw the ball. They're turning back the clock to that Lamar Jackson MVP year and running the ball a ton. So it's a team and some players to consider, but I'm not so sure that they'll be guys that will make a significant impact to the end of the fantasy season. Next team up is the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers have an excellent finish this season as well. The Pittsburgh Steelers are 32nd in fantasy points allowed. The Detroit Lions are 29th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. And then the Tampa Bay Bucks, definitely a tough matchup to end the season and for your fantasy championship. So you might need to have or want to rely on some depth here, because at that point it might be a tough matchup, because if the Bucks are fully healthy in the secondary, this would be a difficult matchup for them. But they're 14th, middle of the pack. DJ Moore is the guy we have to talk about, right? Moore has a 28.3% target share on the season. That is 12th at the position, and over 43% air yard share, which is 3rd at the position. Not to mention 4th in unrealized air yards as well. So we're talking about breaking or hitting big plays with air yards, but we're also talking about air yards that he's not even hitting on. So there's a potential to be even better than he has been, and he's what the difference is finding the end zone. And the Steelers, who are first up, allow 1.6 touchdowns per game to the wide receiver position. So very much potential for him to find the end zone in that first matchup and ensure that you win in your first week of the playoffs and get you to that semifinal. So Moore is a guy who sees plenty of volume. Don't expect that to change, because this is obviously a team that has plenty of passing volume expected to be in trailing game scripts. These are games that I think that they could be competitive in, especially the first two. But regardless, I don't see this as games where they run away with things and put the ball on the ground a ton. The other option here is Terrace Marshall, who I think is an excellent waiver wire option and waiver wire add this week. He's like 7% rostered right now. Has run just one less route than DJ Moore the last 3 weeks. Getting rid of Robbie Anderson has been huge for him to finally emerge in this offense. He's averaging 7.5 targets per game the last 2 weeks. And last week against the Bengals, he was tied for the team lead in targets with 6. So Marshall is a player that could be a sneaky add, especially in some deeper leagues, but definitely a player I would look to add now. He has a matchup against the Falcons even this week, so a player that in the second half could be able to return some value for you in your starting lineups. But he's another player to consider in a deeper league as someone that could potentially help you win and get you to the fantasy championship. Maybe not win you a fantasy championship, but those 2 weeks could definitely help you get there. Third team up is the Cleveland Browns. It is the reason why I talked about Deshaun Watson as a second half sleeper, and honestly, I think is going to be a league winner. There are some people in the comments that are telling me that Deshaun Watson will not be able to be the quarterback he was just 2 years ago, or that he was not a top 3 quarterback in the NFL when he was playing, and he absolutely was. This is an elite quarterback who's an elite deep ball passer, and in a Browns offense where they have the best offensive line in football, this team could score so many points in the fantasy playoffs. They go Baltimore, who are 28th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, New Orleans 22nd, and Washington 27th. This is one of the best, the very best of any team in the fantasy playoffs in terms of matchup. So they get the upgraded quarterback with Deshaun Watson. Then they have Amari Cooper, who's already the wide receiver 10 on the season, has a 27.3% target share, which is 14th at the position, and he's 3rd in air yards and 9th in unrealized air yards. This guy continues to hit big plays, continues to be open downfield, and he's going to get a significant upgrade at the quarterback position. I don't think anyone really realizes that this guy is the wide receiver 10 on the season. He's not someone that it was on my radar early in the year or in pre-draft, but now certainly is. So Amari Cooper could be in for a massive finish and win you your fantasy league. No doubt about it. The other guy, though, that I do want to talk about and did talk about as another second half sleeper, if you guys haven't checked out that video, Donovan Peoples-Jones. He's the wide receiver 52 on the year. Obviously, just doesn't have quite the amount of volume or touchdowns. Really, it's the touchdowns. He hasn't scored this year. But he has a 19% target share, which is definitely serviceable. He's 30th in receiving yards, despite having the bye this past week. And there's some players that have played 9 games so far this season. So respectable numbers. He's putting up, I think he's put up 50 plus yards in 5 straight games, and in 4 of his last 5 games, he's put up 70 plus yards. So he's giving us actually a pretty decent floor recently. And again, an upgrade at QB as the outside guy with Deshaun Watson potentially, and what's going to happen in the fantasy playoffs, he could return significant value off the wire as like a guy who's 20% rostered. Fourth of our 5 teams here is the Houston Texans. The Texans have arguably, they could potentially be the best matchup. They got Kansas City, who are 25th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, Tennessee, who's 30th, and the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are 24th. The question is, can you trust Brandon Cooks? Brandon Cooks is expected to be back this week after sitting out Thursday Night Football. Basically, the reasoning was he sat out of practice expecting to be traded, didn't materialize. He wasn't happy. The team didn't want to play him as he hadn't been in practice and preparing for their opponent. But Lovie Smith did say he will be back and playing this week. And I think Cooks can kind of wipe that off and get to business here. He's eventually probably going to be traded, maybe in the offseason, and will eventually be off this team. But I think he's not going to have a problem getting back and getting into playing because his target share and his opportunity is still there. He's got a 23.1% target share, 28th at the position, and 7.6 targets per game. He's a wide receiver 48 right now. He just has not been, I think he's given you decent floor week to week, but hasn't given you, I think he's given you 2 weeks where you're actually, maybe 1 week where you're actually happy. I think it was week 2. But I think this is an excellent buy low spot. And there could be some people in your league that have him that are struggling and are looking to just try to get to the playoffs and can't deal with this performance from Brandon Cooks so far. And you, as someone who potentially could be, let's say, 6-3 on the year, 7-2, 8-1, you could take advantage of that, add this guy, and potentially he could help you win your fantasy championship because of those excellent matchups. Because I still trust the Texans passing offense. I don't think it's like a putrid offense that can't move the ball through the air at all. I think that they, in positive matchups, can still be productive and be able to score you enough fantasy points and make Brandon Cooks a player that you're very happy you added at this point in the year. Last team, one I'm very, very excited about is the New York Jets. The Jets have a really good fantasy schedule to finish the year as well. They go against the Detroit Lions, who are 29th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. The Jacksonville Jaguars, 24th. And then the Seattle Seahawks, who are actually 3rd in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. But in terms of against quarterbacks in particular, they haven't been good or they haven't been great against the pass. It's tight ends that have really killed them. So I do still think that this is still a positive matchup for the Jets, not like a uber positive, but still one that I think Garrett Wilson's a guy who is just a matchup proof type player at this point. Garrett Wilson is going to be a league winner. If you haven't tried to trade for him, you need to do it now. He's already given us 2 really good weeks. Maybe somebody isn't thinking that they were big enough weeks and will still trade him at a low enough value that you can feel good acquiring him. I'm in a league where I have actually Chris Godwin, Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Pittman, and I have Garrett Wilson on my bench. I'm actively looking to trade at least one of those guys because I don't want to have any excuse to leave Garrett Wilson on my bench. He is going to win you your league, and it's because of these matchups, but it's also because he's 18th in targets. His 1.91 yards per route run is 16th at the position. He's 15th in yards after the catch per reception, and is a nearly 30% end zone target share. This guy is the entire offense. He's an elite player, an elite skill set, and he's being used in a way that tells me that he is going to be a league winner for fantasy managers. You need to go acquire him because the matchups are great. He's doing everything: volume, yards after the catch, touchdowns. What else can you ask for from a fantasy player other than those three things? The Jets are a top 10 team as well in pass attempts per game. The problem will be, can they protect? Can they give Zach Wilson enough time to move the ball? Is Zach Wilson going to be able to complete any passes? I think he'll be able to do that in these matchups. More importantly, though, the Lions and Jags are bottom 5 in sack rate. And of course, the biggest problem for the Jets is the pass protection. These could be some good matchups for Wilson, and ones that I think are less intimidating overall for this offense and confidence in being able to use the pass game. But Garrett Wilson is one of the players you definitely need to take away from this video and go target in your leagues. So those are the 5 teams that have the best fantasy football playoff matchups for the 2022 season. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to let me know, like, subscribe, and of course, go check out our friends over at Betfred. Bet 50, get 250 this week, every week in the NFL. $50 you got to deposit, bet, and they're going to give you $250 in free bets. If you haven't done that yet, and you're in a state like Iowa, Colorado, where else are they? They're in Pennsylvania. There's a number of states that Betfred's available. Go download the app. Go sign up with the link that is down below in the description. It really helps out the show, helps out Betfred, and you're getting a great welcome offer from them. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.